India has 4.5 million election officials to manage its voting system. That is more than our entire population. And you know what's the beauty about this? When they do have an election, they don't count stubs. The entire electoral process in India is now computerized. It's completely automated. It's totally paperless, and by going paperless, they save 800,000 tons of paper. So just think about it. India, supposedly a poor country, can get its entire voting system automated. And in some cases, the most powerful country in the world was debating for months after counting stubs as to who the president should be. So put the two things and you'll realize, you'll start to appreciate certain dimensions. It's got a very resilient culture. It's got immense racial and linguistic variety across its landmass. It's also a very religiously diverse country. Yes, predominantly they are all Hindus, 80%, but it's got 14% of its population as Muslims, and 14% of 1 billion makes a large number, making India the second largest Muslim population in the world. Okay, so all those things have to be kept in mind as you start appreciating the country. A quick look at the Indian economy. GDP today is approximately 700 billion. That is if you were to calculate it in absolute or the nominal or the classical way, whichever way you want to call it. But we all know that that's a very misleading statistic, because a dollar in Singapore may not go half as much as a dollar's worth in India. Or to put it in another way, a Singapore dollar converted into Indian rupees goes a lot further in what you can buy and what you can achieve in India than what you can here in Singapore. And that's how we get to a reference point known as the purchasing power parity, which means basically what is the value of your money and what is the value of your economy. Now, if you do it along those lines, PPP for short, then the Indian economy is said to be around $3.6 trillion. That makes it the fourth largest economy in the world today, after the US, Japan, and China. And by 2020, it's supposed to become the third largest, overtaking Japan itself. Its rate of growth for many years was very, very low, 2 to 3%, so much so they used to nickname it as the Hindu rate of growth. But since economic reforms began in the early 1990s, it has started to pick up, and today it's very comfortably chalking anything above 6%. In fact, in the last fiscal year, it chalked up 8.1%. And today, Indian economists, Indian politicians do not shy away from talking about the possibility of double-digit growth. Okay, so they're very comfortable about that. And 8.1% of a 3.6 trillion market or economy is stupendous growth. Its exports, its engagement with the external world is also increasing. Its exports has grown from 75 billion in 2004 to 90 billion last year, and that's 20% growth in a year. Its imports chalked up 34% growth. And yet, despite all that, India still accounts for less than 1% of global trade. Given the size of the country, given the appetite of the people, that is really a drop in the bucket. And that means that you can expect India to be surging ahead with external trading with the global market in the years to come. Her target is to reach 1% by 2007. She's well on her way to do that. But frankly speaking, a country the size of India should be commanding something like 7 to 8% of global trade, which is where China is today. So they are pushing ahead. They are starting to export a lot. And as they export a lot, they will source a lot, and which means the imports will also start to rise. Incidentally, because of our position and our connectivities, a lot of India's trade with the external world passes through Singapore. So you can expect Singapore-India trade to go up Not because we are consuming more, we are exporting more of our indigenous products, but because India's trade with the global world or the global market is going up and it will pass through Singapore. Industrial production is growing again at a double-digit rate, 10%. Actually, it's gone up to 11.5%. And India, which was on the brink of bankruptcy 12 years ago, I remember when Manmohan Singh started his economic reforms, there was something like less than $1 billion of reserves. And the World Bank was about to declare India a bankrupt country because they didn't have enough money to sustain not even 3 months of imports. And everybody was starting to wonder whether India will make it. Today, she has the 4th largest reserves, and it's climbing very fast, more than $143 billion in reserves. If you look at the Indian economy, it's got a very, very diabolical picture, if I may use that word. If you look at the sectors, agriculture, services and industry by GDP, today services have shot ahead to contribute more than half of the economy, half of the GDP. And we all know that because we all recognize India as a major service provider, the back office of the world, the knowledge center of the world, and they're doing very well. And so it's not surprising that services has taken over. And industry is also catching up. It's contributing about a quarter. And then you have agriculture that's only contributing about 20 to 22%. But you juxtapose that or you flip it around and look at the employment picture, and you suddenly realize it's very skewed the other way, where agriculture still accounts for bulk of employment, or more than half of employment, almost 60%. And services, with all its stock and all its contribution, still accounts for only a quarter of the labor force. And services here does not mean just IT. I'm talking about the entire gamut of services. Strangely enough, if you look at only IT or IT-enabled services, they account for less than 2 million jobs in a country the size of 1 billion. And yet they account for so much in terms of the income. Why does this matter? Well, naturally, if you understand politics and you sometimes wonder why a certain minister or chief minister or party that seem to have been doing so well on the economic front, so pro-business, so pro-reform, suddenly gets voted out of power. And the simple reason is sometimes they get too carried away with doing economic reform on the industrial side, on the services side, cleaning up the cities. They forget that there's this huge rural base and huge agricultural base that has been completely forgotten. And it's no point talking to a man about how well the country is doing if he's not enjoying the benefits. And that is why some of the more pro-business, proactive politicians got voted out, because they completely forgot where the masses are. Which is why also, if you look at what analysts are saying, the future of India depends on how well she can also build up her agricultural sector, because that's where the employment is. The Indian economy, if you look at it, divide up the income groups, and you'll notice the high, middle and high income groups are starting to grow. Depending on who you talk to, they will tell you that the middle income group with a lot of disposable income is either 250, 300, 350. I saw a figure yesterday that said 400 million. 400 million people in the middle class with a lot of money to spend. If you are in business and you are providing services to consumers, then if that figure doesn't make you salivate, nothing will. It also has, at the same time, population, a quarter of the population below the poverty line. So this is also a very disturbing thing, and sometimes you will understand why politicians have to balance their priorities, make sure that the sociological aspects are taken care of, making sure that the people below the poverty line are also taken care of. It's not always talking about business and pro-business. They've got to make sure that people at the bottom end of the ladder have to be also picked up.